Hello, good afternoon. John White here. Happy New Year. January 12th, we're going to jump into the Queen's Indian Defense. So a couple things here. I created a slide deck, a little slide here, that I compared against chess.com's opening book to look at the percentages of games in the master games area of chess.com. And we see that in Queen's Indian Defense, which we'll go over, there's about 5 named variations and even a 6th one, the 4 bishop g5 at the end over here, that it was part of Roman's lab. And we're going to go over them. And it's kind of interesting to see the percentage, and I, where necessary, went ahead and put a score from the engine afterwards. So it's interesting that we can see that they're all about, 0.26, 0.14, 0.22, 0.15, 0.14, then 0.02. All right, let's go ahead and let's jump on in. Queen's Indian Defense. So after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, b6. For a long time, playing the Queen's Indian with either color was regarded as a sign of peacefulness. After all, by playing knight f3, white avoids the complications of the Nimzo-Indian defense, whereas black, by not transposing to the Queen's Gambit declined via d5, avoids a confrontation in the center. In fact, the term Queen's Indian used to be synonymous with avoiding a fight. In some books, it has even been called a drawish opening. For those who only started playing chess after about 1980 and have consequently not lived through this anti-Queen's Indian era, it will be hard to understand that such an attitude towards opening ever existed. But it was only when Garry Kasparov made his way to the top in the early 1980s, using the move 3 knight f3 to extremely good effect, and creating a whole new world of variations in the Queen's Indian, that this attitude changed. Kasparov forged the variations a3, 4 knight c3, and then followed by bishop bb4 by black, and then bishop g5 by white, and to a lesser extent g3, into a new and very dangerous weapons. And suddenly this became one of the most popular openings, superseding the knight c3 and the Nimzo-Indian completely, at least for some time. Since then, almost every top grandmaster has played the Queen's Indian, often with both colors, and they've all contributed something to the rapid development of dynamic and challenging variations, offering rich potential rewards for both white and black. As a result, theory of the Queen's Indian has become almost as complex as that of the Nimzo. And unlike 40 years ago, some knowledge of variations is now essential if you want to play this opening. White's most important method was, and still is, g3. By putting his king's bishop on g2, White takes up the challenge of fighting for control over the important h1 to a8 diagonal and over the central squares e4 and d5. Although it may not look very to the point at first sight, a3 takes up this challenge as well. White wants to play the natural developing move, knight to c3, without being disturbed by the Nimzo-Indian pin, which is bishop to b4 by black. This amazingly laconic little move was first used by Kasparov and Petrosian and later by Kasparov to surprisingly good effect. the games of Kasparov in particular prove that, far from being a waste of time, 4a3 is the vital starting move of an extremely aggressive strategy that caused black quite a headache during the 1980s. Strangely enough, 4 knight to c3, although it is in fact the most natural move, was used by Kasparov as even subtler starting move of his aggressive strategy. By starting his plan with 4 knight c3, white avoids the variation of a3 and then bishop a6, which became more and more of a problem for white during the 1980s. If black simply replies bishop b7, white will play a3. And against bishop b4, he has the sharp bishop g5. This line is really a fusion of the Queen's and the Nimzo-Indian, and it is a highly explosive mixture. Completely different, but no less important, is e3. This quiet developing move does not spark off a fierce struggle right away, yet the resulting middle game positions are often very tense and full of promise of a fascinating fight. Finally, there are the moves bishop f4 and bishop g5 to be mentioned. These are relatively unburdened with theoretical baggage. So for bishop f4 caused quite a stir for a short period of time in the late 1970s. This is called the Miles variation, the bishop f4. And looks like it's played about 2% of the time in the Queen's Indian. So it's not played that much. Also, I heard that GM Ben Feingold likes playing this move, the bishop f4 line. So bishop f4 caused quite a stir for a short period of time in the late 1970s. However, it has become clear this move does little to make life difficult for black. After bishop b7, e3, bishop e7, h3, and then black attacks with c5, attacks the center. Now it does say that if on move 6, instead of h3, white plays knight c3, this does allow black to play knight to h5, eliminating the bishop. Okay, now bishop g5. I made a note here. This was from Roman's lab, recommended in a opening repertoire for white and black DVD, a complete repertoire for the tournament player. Roman lab, bishop g5. Now that was used by about 1% of the chess.com population in the database. And it says, bishop g5 too has had its devotees, but it is generally regarded as equally harmless. The simple reply, bishop b7, e3, bishop e7, knight c3, knight e4, leads to exchanges and a lessening of tension. Now, it does say that after bishop e7, there's a crucial difference from the line for knight c3, bishop b4, bishop g5, mentioned above. So there's the difference between this line and this line. So notice there's no bishop on b7. There's no bishop on BB4 check with the knight C3 there.